Welcome to GovCast, connecting with federal IT's top decision makers. I'm your host, Nikki Henderson. Today, we're chatting with Eric Mill, Executive Director for Cloud Strategy at the General Services Administration. He'll be sharing updates on the FedRAMP 2024-2025 roadmap, including the launch of an Agile delivery pilot and an automation website. Eric will also talk about the latest developments with the emerging technology prioritization framework and how it will soon provide agencies with access to generative AI capabilities. Today, I'm speaking with Eric Mill, the Executive Director for Cloud Strategy at the General Services Administration. He will share an update on FedRAMP's 2024-2025 roadmap, the latest on the final emerging technology prioritization framework that was released earlier this year, as well as details on the ongoing process to fill the FedRAMP director role. Hello, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here.
Well, Eric, can you please give a brief description of your role and tell me how your past experience at the Office of Management and Budget and your time in industry led you to your current position?
Sure. So my role here, my title is the Executive Director for Cloud Strategy at GSA. And, in practice, given what's going on with FedRAMP right now, the overwhelming majority of my time is spent with helping support the FedRAMP team and help, we'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, about helping to recruit permanent leadership for the team. And generally just getting through a year that is filled with a pretty tremendous set of changes in terms of governance, policy, and strategy for the FedRAMP program. So, my background is a little eclectic, but I, started professional life as a software engineer, and in just about every job I had where I was working as a software engineer and a web developer, I was working with the cloud. I was deploying things to major commercial cloud providers myself, and still have some personal capacity stuff where I do that, and was really got to spend time with the evolution of cloud platforms over the last 10, 20 years. And it really does feel like almost about 20 years now since some of these things that we now think of as sort of baked into the cloud and ubiquitous really started forming and being offered to people and organizations around the world. So I had some of that for some time, and then eventually, this is actually my second time around at GSA. I worked at GSA for about 4 or 5 years, some years ago now, when the digital services teams were growing, and so had the opportunity to come into government and start to do some technology work here, as well as what turned out to be policy and product work. And one of the things I think I like to mention about the sort of the state of government when I came in 2014, very relevant to this, is that I was able to deploy code to the commercial cloud here in the government in 2014, which is the year that I first joined government, and was still working as a software engineer. And that was made possible by what FedRAMP did in its first few years and what the government had sort of pulled together. And I would say even at that time in 2014, it was still like you wouldn't necessarily find the use of commercial cloud, especially at the infrastructure level, at every agency. I was working at GSA has a long history of being forward-looking on cloud, which definitely has something to do with why FedRAMP is here. But you could do it. And you could do it safely and in an understood security framework. And that is because of FedRAMP. Now, in 2024, 10 years later, it is you would be hard pressed to find an agency of significant size that does not have such a footprint. And that is because of what FedRAMP did to make especially cloud infrastructure safe and ubiquitous. So that definitely feeds into it. And I did after spending a little bit of time in the Hill and out in industry. I did just work at OMB earlier in this term, where I worked on some related issues here around cloud security and zero trust and FedRAMP. And so I think having had the experience of being out in the private sector, doing software engineering and doing product, having had the experience of working at GSA as an engineer and now in leadership, working at OMB and kind of looking at this from the government-wide angle, I think it gives you a pretty good vantage point on how the stuff plays out in different ways around the government, and about what the different incentives are at play and the different risk tolerances and temperaments that agencies have. And that's very much something that is at the core of what FedRAMP has to deal with, which is this thorny problem of it's supposed to be just one thing that you do, and it's a consistent thing, and it just should work all across government. And yet, of course, the reality is that agencies are very different in what they need to do from a risk management perspective. So FedRAMP has the interesting challenge of working with that and bringing consistency to it where it can.
Okay, wow, great. Well, it's been a few months since FedRAMP released the 2024-2025 roadmap. Can you give us any updates or milestones FedRAMP has accomplished from the initiatives featured in the roadmap?
Yeah. So one of the things I have really been enjoying about the work this year is how public we've been able to be to sort of show, and not just when things are all the way done, but as things are making clear progress and there's something to talk about, something to engage the public on, we've been able to come forward on this. And so, if you go, for example, check out the FedRAMP blog, you will see what has become a raft of different posts and things that we've been sharing and seeking public comment on since we first published our roadmap at the end of March of this year. Well, I'll mention, and so, if you're interested in any of the stuff I mentioned, that's where you should go to find more about it. But I'll mention a couple of things that I think are especially interesting. So one thing is we have been making some pretty major investments in automation in FedRAMP, and by automation, I mean a couple of things. Our ability to actually, put APIs and interconnectivity in place so that agencies and companies can connect their systems directly to ours eventually, so that things can flow without people having to email things around or manually upload things to a web form, or the things that humans do with information. We are working to set things up so that this stuff can just move without that kind of human intervention and enable things like real-time sharing. We are also engaged in a broader sort of digitization effort where we want to move away from the world that we definitely all live in today, especially here in the federal government, where a lot of our key compliance and security information is oftentimes shipped around in Word documents that run hundreds of pages long, and that's not a data-oriented way to manage cybersecurity in the federal government. I think that's a non-controversial thing to say. FedRAMP has been, we've been talking about, and people have been talking to FedRAMP about automation for a number of years now. One of the things we're doing this year to really push this forward, and we've made some significant investments in people and our priorities and just how we organize our work. One of the ways you can see this is we launched a automation website, automate.fedramp.gov, that is in many ways the developer hub, I think, for FedRAMP, and also is sort of it itself is an open source project and is tied into the other open source software tools and repositories that we are maintaining and participating in that are meant to drive forward this ability for us to move to machine readable security packages, where we will be documenting our APIs and how you can integrate your tooling into FedRAMP. And so while we definitely have some more work to go before all of this stuff is actually flowing in our ideal utopian state, we are putting out very real technical specifications, engaging the developer community on how this needs to work, figuring out rough edges, so that as we bring our infrastructure online, we're in a strong position and we're making this kind of progress. So that's one. I guess I'll mention one more, which is what we call our Agile delivery pilot. So this is something where, and you can see this, in our roadmap, we talk about the fact that we do want to move FedRAMP past a sort of blunt change control board style process for change review. So I find that folks out, sort of not closely tuned into the FedRAMP ecosystem, know what it is, but maybe haven't worked super directly with the program, are not always aware of the fact that FedRAMP has what's called the significant change request process, where significant security impacting changes that a cloud provider makes, if you're FedRAMP authorized, then it comes in for approval by the sponsoring agency or a sponsoring organization in the government that owns that authorization. And so that and that's done on a per change basis. And so we are saying here, and you can see this reflected in the OMB White House memorandum as well, a desire to move to a place where we are reconfiguring our processes to get what we think is speed and security at the same time, right? Where we can actually focus our security review up front and our oversight ongoing on the process that is used to deploy changes and to develop these changes, where we should be caring more about things like continuous integration and secure software development and release engineering and the functions of a provider that are strongly correlated to whether or not the individual changes that are being made are good enough. And that is something where we think we're both going to get a lot more bang for our buck from a security perspective by focusing in those areas, but that also affords us the ability to move away from this sort of blocking per change process. So that's a big operational shift. It's a big process shift for FedRAMP. We are starting with a pilot to make sure we understand the impact of doing this and to make sure we're change managing this in a responsible way. So we announced that the parameters of that and opened applications a little earlier this summer. We should soon be in a position to start talking about the implementation of that and who we'll be working with. But that's something that we've been making a lot of progress on, and which we are particularly excited about.
Awesome. That is exciting. Well, Eric, FedRAMP released the final emerging technology prioritization framework in June, and it is exciting to see agencies will have access to generative AI capabilities real soon. Can you share how that's going, and when do applications for interested cloud service providers?
So thank you for asking about that. And for those maybe not familiar, the emerging technology prioritization framework is something that FedRAMP it was actually a tasking in the artificial intelligence executive order that came out earlier this year. And what it does is it establishes a framework for how FedRAMP will give an extra priority, basically move folks ahead in the review process for cloud providers that are offering particularly identified emerging technologies. And right now, there's only one emerging technology that has been identified, which is generative artificial intelligence. And there's a few forms of that, image generation, code generation, and chat interfaces. The framework is designed to accommodate the fact that we will be doing more emerging technologies and not just generative AI in the future. But given the focus on this right now, that is what we are doing. So the form for folks to raise their hand to be prioritized is open until August 31st of this year. And then we'll be announcing our initial prioritization determinations by September 30th, so a month later. So, I don't have, too much to share about exactly, who is submitted and what we're doing. But we're very, we think this is a really positive thing for FedRAMP. And there's a general principle under here that is important precedent for FedRAMP. Whereas FedRAMP to this point has operated in more or less a first in, first out framework, which of course is very important from a consistency, fairness, predictability standpoint. But also, the world continues to change, and there are priorities that the government has and should have in order to be able to move faster in certain areas when the times demand it. That is just a general principle that is not specific to generative AI. And so having this in place so that FedRAMP can contribute to government-wide efforts to move forward in important areas is something that is, I think, what people expect the government to be able to do from the outside when things are important, is to be able to exert a sense of priority in an understandable and fairly done way. So that's among the reasons we're excited about doing this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, what about leadership and filling the FedRAMP director role? Can you share where you are in filling that role and in hiring in general?
Sure. So we're very close on the FedRAMP director. the way that government hiring and the rules around that work, I still have to be a little coy here on dates and such. But we're very much looking forward to welcoming an incoming director of the program in the very near future. I also want to make sure to talk about a couple of things. The first one I'll mention here, and I think this will likely still be relevant on the timing of this podcast. We currently have up right now a description. The posting hasn't opened yet, but we have the public description up for another key leadership role in FedRAMP, which is our security director. And so if one were to go visit join.tts.gsa.gov, where our part of GSA posts all of our job descriptions up before they go live, you would find that we have what we think is a pretty exciting role described there. That is, the role that will really help set and implement the security vision for FedRAMP, and will oversee the team that implements that in our authorization processes. So that's that we just put that up maybe a week or two ago, and so we're in the process right now of doing public information sessions about it, which you can also find information there if you want to come and learn about the position. And if you're new to applying to the federal government, we do a lot of work to try to demystify that process, make it less intimidating, make it more reasonable for people to feel they can apply and do that and make it through the process. So really encourage folks who may have not done that before to take a look. But that's a big position we have coming up. I also do want to mention too, we have been making real investments in hiring, to bringing in technical expertise and more capacity into the program. That's been a priority. We were at a government-wide hiring fair earlier this year in April. It's called Tech2Gov. It's an initiative of the Office of Personnel Management and this administration broadly to bring in more technology practitioners into government. This one in April was AI focused and sort of data scientists and analysis focused. And so we were there, and we will very likely be ending this fiscal year with a team of multiple people that will be building out the sort of automation and data, machine readability and data analysis vision that I was talking about earlier in this. So that's a full view of our hiring right now, and we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that is exciting. Well, are there any immediate plans for Q4 deliverables?
Yeah, so we being in Q4 now, I will mention something that we just put out last week that I didn't mention earlier in this, and that will part of what will be happening in the rest of Q4 is us finalizing this and engaging with folks is around guidance around cryptographic modules, which is a little bit of a jargony term that really means just software and hardware that is involved in implementing some of the security features that involve cryptography. So encryption is a big one, encrypting things in transit or at rest so that they can't be seen or modified by others. It also involves things like digital signing, right? And so that you can attribute ownership and activity on documents and data and stuff like that. So that there's one of the sort of long-standing issues that cloud providers have often had working with the federal government is on how federal standards around the software and hardware cryptography implementations, how those need to work, what rules they need to follow. I'm not going to get into lots of detail here on this. And if for folks who are familiar with the term FIPS 140, which is the sort of relevant standards document that governs how this stuff works, that's an area where folks have wanted to see updated guidance from FedRAMP on how these standards can be applied. And so we just published a proposed update in how FedRAMP will apply those things. And I'll just voice that one of the big, one of the things you'll see us talk about in that post is that we want to make sure that people don't get caught in a crucible when bad things happen, right? So there are rules around for example, the government only using cryptography that has gone through lab testing. There's also rules in the federal government around if you have a security vulnerability that's critical, you need to patch it. These are all things that are expected of people. And sometimes, if those things can be seen as being in tension with each other, and we want to, we may not be able to fully, make difficult situations trivial, but what we can do is, plan ahead for those situations and provide some guidance so that people have confidence in what they should do. So that's what we're trying to do in that. I think it'll be a big part of our Q4, working through this with cloud providers and getting to a good final state on that.
Okay, great. Well, before we conclude, Eric, I wanted to know, are there any future initiatives that you're excited to talk about?
Yeah. I mean, so that is definitely a big one that I just went through. I'll also mention there's another thing that folks have a lot of interest in, who are close to the FedRAMP ecosystem, has been around how some of the rules around how different cloud providers can talk to other cloud providers. So this is one of those things that is can be a little bit invisible sometimes to folks who are only paying a little high level attention to the space, but you and I as humans and our organizations will use, there are cloud services that we'll just use. We're recording our podcast on one right now, but there are cloud services out there that are also, those cloud providers are using other cloud services under the hood to make all that stuff happen, right? They're built atop, or pulling together things from companies aren't building everything from scratch internally all the time, just like our own enterprises are not doing that. So the rules around what FedRAMP authorized cloud services, what other cloud services they can use, has been something where folks have wanted more clarity on this for some time. And I think that's especially true with the transition that's been happening around the types of FedRAMP authorizations and governance of the program. So the jargony name for the vehicle by which we'll be addressing some of this is called our boundary guidance, which talks about sort of what's in scope and out of scope of in the FedRAMP boundary, how cloud providers need to think about that. It also speaks to for example, how to draw the line between the product that a company makes and then the things that they use internally just to do their own work and get through their own day, right? Like their company as an enterprise versus their company as a product. And so that we'll tackle a number of things, but among them will be how we sort through some of the policies around what's allowed to interconnect with what. And so that is, I feel like of all the things I've talked about, that's sort of like the least flashy that I could bring up, but it's also something that is of significant interest to folks close to the FedRAMP community that we are working towards.
Right. Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I think you've covered a lot and it's very informative. So thank you so much. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, and maybe down the road we could get more updates from you. I know things are happening the end of this month, next month. So maybe we can connect again in the future and get more updates on FedRAMP. But I do thank you for your time and for bringing us up to date so far. So I hope that you have a great rest of your day, Eric.
Well, you too. I've really enjoyed being here. So thanks for the conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of GovCast. We'll be back next month with a brand new interview in our GovCIO Media and Research podcast feed. But until then, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating on the podcast platform of your choice. Thank you again for listening. I'm Nikki Henderson, and we'll see you next time.
GovCast, along with HealthCast and Cybercast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. To explore our content, visit our website, govciomedia.com. Keep an eye out for new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like what you heard, leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Have a topic you want us to discuss? Contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.